looking down below, we can see the rocket ships and the peg ponds have both come up in the same search. We could probably fit rings on either of them. The rocket ships are almost as big around as the rings are, but a lot of that is the fins. But it's hard to say for certain how they'd hold the rings. The pegs are a little smaller around than the rocket ships, but they're a little more expensive. But since the tip is so much narrower than the base, the rings could almost certainly fit on them. Now, unfortunately, the rings don't tell us how big the center opening is, just how big they are on the perimeter. But we can make a decent guess based on the size in the picture. And the pegs are probably going to be the better fit, but the rocket ships are more interesting and they're a little cheaper. So, even though they don't quite fit thematically, they're suitable for the level of abstraction. And one could argue that they look a bit like Zeppelins, even if they don't really look like ships. So we're going to get rid of the old pieces. So we'll probably use the joysticks for the cities because they can fit more rings and the cities can take more damage. So we're going to need 2 of each rocket ship and enough rings to represent the health on each of them. Now, because we're taking so many of them, we're going to get a bulk discount. Anything more than 10 rings, and the rings drop ever so slightly in price. The same is true for most pieces. Pretty much all but the cheapest pieces will go down in price. But we're still slightly over our limit. So once again, back to editing parts. Get rid of our planes. They were a nice fit, but since we're going for a level of abstraction on the airships and the cities, we can afford to lose the planes. The delete button on the green is being temperamental, but there we go. So something to replace the planes then. Again, we need to go to our color scheme. We're just going to look at tokens, something plain and simple. We could use rings, the same rings that we're using for the other things, just have them fly in individually, but that might be a bit confusing. So we're going to go ahead and add winks instead. Nice, simple, generic token. They're unimpressive, but the fighters are the pawns to the game if the city is the king. So unimpressive doesn't really hurt us as much in this circumstance. But it looks like even that wasn't quite enough. So what now? What else can we eliminate? Well, maybe we can reduce the number of rings. How many rings do we really need? Well, the rockets, which is, say, the airships, need to have 2 health each. So we need 4 health total for that. And for the joysticks, which is to say the cities, we want them to have probably 5 health. So we have 4 sides. We need 9 health to get the pieces. So 36 units overall. Except we added 36 for each color of ring rather than just having a total of 36 rings. So it looks like we're actually overspending on the rings by quite a bit. So back to the parts section. Now, 9 rings isn't enough for the bulk rate. So we're spending a little more per ring than we were before, but overall we're saving money. But what if we wanted the bulk rate? We'd only need 1 more ring. The rings are 8 cents a piece for up to 9, and 7 cents a piece once you hit 10. So 9 times 8 is 72, and 10 times 7 is 70. So we're actually saving money for ourselves and for our end users by putting in a spare part. But our cost still seems a little high. The simple truth is that the cost of components for a couple of these has actually gone up a bit since the contest originally happened. We can't keep it under the $19.99 budget. We might as well do it the way that we want. We still want to keep things reasonably priced, and the parts decisions we've made aren't horrible. One thing worth noting when you're updating quantities, always click out of the box when you're done, because sometimes it won't save properly if you don't. So we're going to go ahead and add a gold doubloon to pass around as a first player token. Now I'm going to look through the pieces to see if there's anything else I'm interested in changing. Well, while the rocket ships are interesting, since cost isn't a factor, having had some time to think about it, the pegs will probably hold the rings a bit better, and really they don't look enough like airships, unless you put them on this side, but then they're verging on being too long. So, peg pawns it is. When you go through and build the game, you can use rocket ships if you want. Again, 2 of each. So the important part here is something to represent airships, 2 per side, something to represent cities, 1 per side, something to represent fighters, 4 per side, first player token if you like, something to represent health for the pieces. The rings are nice because they can go on the pawns themselves, but if you don't use those pawns, then you don't necessarily have a reason to use the rings. Again, filling in the basics of information, 12 plus because there's nothing particularly adult about it, 1 to 4 players, game taxonomy. This one is a board game because we use a board. It's a warfare game where the Steam City Defense was not really warfare, even though there was battling involved. Steampunk, again. This one's a little more on the hardcore gamer range because it requires taking time to learn the rules, strategy. Again, alternate past. Primary mechanic. Once again, primary mechanic can often be tricky, but in this case, I want people to think of the game as a strategy game, so listing the primary mechanic as strategy helps reinforce that.